Okay, we are on chapter 3, which is desire continued. And we are into the vehicle of desire. So it's all rather interesting here. I may have to read a little bit from the book to get us started because it looks like some of this is cut off here. So let's get going. We shall have to return to the struggle in the desired nature in order to add some useful details to that which has already been said. But it is first necessary to study the vehicle of desire, the desire body or astral body, as this study will enable us to understand the precise method in which we may work to subdue and get rid of the lower desires. The vehicle of desire is made up of what is called astral matter, the matter of the plane above the physical. And you can see this over here on the right. And we should be really familiar with what we're talking about at this point here now, right? This matter, like the physical, exists in 7 modifications, which relatively to each other are like the solid, liquid, gaseous, etc. substates of matter on the physical plane. As the physical body contains within itself these various substates of physical matter, so does the astral body contain within itself the various substates of astral matter. Each of these substates has in it coarser and finer aggregations, and the work of astral, as of physical purification, consists in the substitution of the finer for the coarser. Moreover, the lower substates of astral matter serve chiefly for the manifestation of the lower desires, while the higher substates vibrate in answer to the desires which have changed by the intermixture of mind into emotions. The lower desires, grasping after objects of pleasure, find that the lower substates serve as medium for their attractive force, and the coarser and baser the desires, the coarser are the aggregations of matter that fitly express them. As the desire causes the corresponding material in the astral body to vibrate, the matter becomes strongly vitalized and attracts fresh similar matter from the outside to itself, and thus increases the amount of such matter in the constitution of the astral body. When the desires are gradually refined into emotions, intellectual elements entering into them, and selfishness diminishing, the amount of finer matter similarly increases in the astral body, while the coarser matter left unvitalized loses energy and decreases in amount. These facts applied to practice help us to weaken the enemy which is enthroned within us, for we can deprive him of his instruments. A traitor within the gates is more dangerous than a foe outside, and the desire body acts as such a traitor so long as it is composed of elements that answer to the temptations from without. Desire, as it builds in coarser materials, must be checked by the mind refusing to picture the passing pleasure which the possession of the object would entail, and picturing to itself the more lasting sorrow it would cause. As we get rid of the coarser matter which vibrates in answer to the baser attractions, those attractions lose all power to disturb us. This vehicle of desire, then, must be taken in hand. According to its building will be the attractions that reach us from without. We can work upon the form, change the elements of which the form is composed, and thus in turn the enemy into a defender. When a man is evolving in character, he is, however, confronted with a difficulty which often alarms and depresses him. He finds himself shaken by desires from which he shrinks, of which he is ashamed, and despite his strenuous efforts to shake them off, they nonetheless cling to and torment him. They are discordant with his efforts, his hopes, his aspirations, and yet in some way they seem to be his. And I think, certainly we should all, this should resonate with all of us. Certainly. It's interesting that how this process takes place. And then, these things fade off. So this painful experience is due to the fact that the consciousness evolves more rapidly than the form can change, and the two are to some extent in conflict with each other. There is a considerable amount of coarser aggregation still present in the astral body, but as the desires have become more refined, they no longer vivify these materials. Some of the old vitality nonetheless persists therein, and although these aggregations are decaying, they are not wholly gone. So what a perfect explanation of what is going on there. And it's due to the fact that the consciousness evolves more rapidly than the form can change. That's pretty telling there for everybody, right? So this is good. So now, although the man's desire nature is no longer using these materials for self-expression, they may yet be thrown into temporary activity from outside and thus take on a semblance of vitality as a galvanized corpse might do. The desires of other people, elementals of an evil kind, may attach themselves to these disused elements in his astral body, and they may thus be stimulated and revivified and cause him to feel as his own the promptings of desires he harbors or he abhors. Where such experiences are undergone, let the bewildered combatant take courage. Even in the inrush of these desires, let him repudiate them as none of his, and know that the elements in him they utilize are of the past and are dying, and that the day of their death and of his freedom is at hand. We may take an example from dream to show this working of effete matter in the astral body. A man in a former life was a drunkard, and his after-death experiences had impressed deeply on him a repulsion for drink. On rebirth, the ego and the new physical and astral bodies impressed on them this repulsion, but there was nonetheless in the astral body some matter drawn thereinto by the vibrations caused in the permanent atom by the former drunkenness. This matter is not vivified in the present life by any cravings for drink, nor any yielding to the drink habit. On the contrary, in the waking life the man is sober. But in dream, this matter in the astral body is stimulated into activity from without, and the control of the ego being weak over the astral body, this matter responds to the drink-craving vibrations that reach it, and the man dreams that he drinks. Moreover, if there is still in the man a latent desire for drink, too weak to assert itself during waking consciousness, it may come up in the dream state. For physical matter being comparatively heavy and hard to move, a weak desire has not energy enough to cause vibrations therein, but that same desire may move the much lighter astral matter, and so a man may be carried away in a dream by a desire which has no power over him in his waking consciousness. Such dreams cause much distress because not understood. The man should understand that the dream shows that the temptation is conquered, for so as he is concerned, and that he is only troubled by the corpse of past desires, vivified from outside on the astral plane, or of it from within, than by a dying desire too weak to move him in his waking moments. The dream is a sign of a victory well near complete. At the same time, it is a warning, for it tells the man that there is still in his astral body some matter apt to be vivified by vibrations of the drink craving, and that therefore he should not place himself during waking life under conditions where such vibrations may abound. Until such dreams have entirely ceased, the astral body is not free from matter that is a source of danger. That is wild, but makes absolute perfect sense. Brilliant. So, to the conflict of desire and thought, and we caught glimpses of this in the earlier chapters too. So we must now return to the struggle in the desire nature, to which reference has already been made, in order to add some necessary details. This conflict belongs to what may be called the middle stage of evolution, that long stage which intervenes between the state of the man entirely ruled by desire, grasping all he wants, unchecked by conscience, undisturbed by remorse, and the state of the highly evolved spiritual man in whom will, wisdom, and activity work in coordinated harmony. The conflict arises between desire and thought. Thought beginning to understand the relation of itself to the not-self and to other separated selves, and desire influenced by the objects around it, moving by attractions and repulsions, drawn hither and thither by objects that allure. We must study the stage of evolution in which the accumulated memories of past experiences stored in the mind set themselves against the gratification of desires which have been proved to lead to pain, or, to speak more accurately, in which the conclusion drawn by the thinker from these accumulated experiences asserts itself in the face of a demand from the desire nature for the object which has been stamped as dangerous. The habit of grasping and enjoying has been established for hundreds of lives and is strong, while the habit of resisting a present pleasure in order to avoid a future pain is only in course of establishment, and is consequently very weak. Hence the conflicts between the thinker and the desire nature end for a long time in a series of defeats. The young mind struggling with mature desire body finds itself constantly vanquished. By every victory of the desire nature being followed by a brief pleasure and a long pain, gives birth to a new force hostile to itself that recruits the strength of its opponent. Each defeat of the thinker thus sows the seeds of his future victory, and his strength daily grows while the strength of the desire nature diminishes. And this is a painful kind of, what can appear to be a rather painful part of the process, or at least seemingly frustrating. When this is clearly understood, we grieve no longer over our own falls and the falls of those we love, for we know that these falls are making sure the secure footing of the future, and that in the womb of pain is maturing the future conqueror. And that's pretty mature attitude at this point, when that attitude can be gained. Right? Our knowledge of right and wrong grows out of experiences and is elaborated only by trial. The sense of right and wrong, now innate in the civilized man, has been developed by innumerable experiences. In the early days of the separated self, all experiences were useful in his evolution and brought him the lessons needful for his growth. Gradually, he learned that the yielding to desires which in the course of their gratification injured others brought him pain out of proportion to the temporary pleasure derived from their satisfaction. He began to attach the word wrong to the desires, the yielding to which brought a predominance of pain, and this the more quickly because the teachers who guided his early growth placed on the objects which attracted such desires the ban of their disapproval. When he had disobeyed them, and suffering followed, the impression made on the thinker was the more powerful for the previous foretelling, and conscience, the will to do the right and abstain from the wrong, was proportionately strengthened. In this connection, we can readily see the value of admonition, reproof, and good counsel. All these are stored up in the mind and are forces added to the accumulating memories which oppose the gratification of wrong desire. It's like training a dog or breaking a horse. It's pretty simple. Granted that the person warned may again yield when the temptation assails him, that only means that the balance of strength is still in the wrong desire. When the foretold suffering arrives, the mind will recall all the memories and warnings and admonitions and will engrave the more deeply in its substance the decision. The desire is wrong. The doing of the wrong act merely means that the memory of the past is not yet sufficiently strong to overbear the attraction of eagerly anticipated and immediate pleasure. The lesson needs to be repeated yet a few times more to strengthen the memory of the past, and when that is done, victory is sure. Suffering is a necessary element in the growth of the soul and has the promise of that growth within it. Everywhere around us, if we see aright, is growing good. Nowhere is there hopeless evil. The struggle is expressed in the sad cry, what I would, that I do not, what I would not, that I do. When I would do good, evil is present with me. The wrong that we do when we wish against the doing is done by the habit of the past. The weak will is overpowered by the strong desire. And that's from St. Paul, and you can't help but giggle at some of these things. If you were a Bible reader and you read that many times, and now we're into the esoteric, you can really see the difference between what we were thinking before. There's a big difference going on there. But anyway, so now the thinker in his conflict with the desire nature calls to his aid that very nature and strives to awaken in it a desire which shall be opposed to the desire against which he is waging war. As the attraction of a weak magnet, and this is I'm glad to see this magnetic connotation put on this, may be overpowered by that of a stronger one, so may one desire be strengthened for the overcoming of another. A right desire may be aroused to combat a wrong one, hence the value of an ideal. And and we'll get into the value of an ideal, but we're looking for the point at which the bonds are broken and there is no more magnetic attractions, to the point where it's just all absolutely inconceivable, the thought of doing those things that before we were in set up in war against. It's just so wild. So let's see the value of an ideal. An ideal is a fixed mental concept of an inspiring character framed for the guidance of conduct, and the formation of an ideal is one of the most effective means of influencing desire. Yeah, this is psychological warfare here in spiritual terms, right? So the ideal may or may not find embodiment in an individual according to the temperament of the man who frames it, and it must ever be remembered that the value of an ideal depends largely on its attractiveness, and that which attracts one temperament by no means necessarily attracts another. An abstract ideal and a personal one are equally good regarded from a general standpoint, and that should be selected which has, on the individual choosing it, the most attractive influence. A person of the intellectual temperament will usually find an abstract ideal the more satisfactory, whereas one of the emotional temperament will demand a concrete embodiment of his thought. The disadvantage of that abstract ideal is that it is apt to fail in the compelling inspiration. The advantage of the concrete embodiment is that the embodiment is apt to fall below the ideal. The mind, of course, creates the ideal and either retains it as an abstraction or embodies it in a person. The time chosen for the creation of an ideal should be a time when the mind is calm and steady and luminous, when the desire nature is asleep. Then the thinker should consider the purpose of his life, the goal at which he aims, and with this to guide his choice, he should select the qualities necessary to enable him to reach that goal. And this is a I'm thinking this is a pretty common practice, right? To build this concept here. I've heard this a number of times before, actually, in different ways. So these qualities he should combine into a single concept, imagining as strongly as he can this integration of the qualities he needs. Daily, he should repeat this integrating process until his ideal stands out clearly in the mind, dowered with all beauty of high thought and noble character, a figure of compelling attractiveness. The man of intellect will keep this ideal as a pure concept. The man of emotional nature will embody it in a person, such as the Buddha, the Christ, Sri Krishna, or some other divine teacher. In this latter case, he will, if possible, study his life, his teaching, his actions, and the ideal will thus become more and more strongly vivified, more and more real to the thinker. Intense love will spring up in the heart for this embodied ideal, and desire will stretch out longing arms to embrace it. And when temptation assails and the lower desires clamor for satisfaction, then the attractive power of the ideal asserts itself. The loftier desire combats the baser, and the thinker finds himself reinforced by right desire, the negative strength of memory, which says, abstain from the base, being fortified by the positive strength of the ideal, which says, achieve the heroic. This is similar to using affirmations. So the man who lives habitually in the presence of a great ideal is armed against wrong desires by the love of his ideal, by shame of being base in its presence, by the longing to resemble that which he adores, and also by the general set and trend of his mind along lines of noble thinking. Wrong desires become more and more incongruous. They perish naturally, unable to breathe in that pure, clear air. It may be worthwhile to remark here, in view of the destructive results of historical criticism in the minds of many, that the value of the ideal Christ, the ideal Buddha, the ideal Krishna, is in no way injured by any lack of historical data, by any defects in the proofs of the authenticity of a manuscript. Many of the stories related may not be historically true, but they are ethically and vitally true. Whether this incident happened in the physical life of this teacher or not is a matter of small import. The reaction of such an ideal character on his environment is ever profoundly true, of course. The world's scriptures represent spiritual facts, whether the physical incidents be or not be historically true. Thus, thought may shape and direct desire, and turn it from an enemy into an ally by changing the direction of desire. It becomes a lifting and quickening instead of a retarding force. And where desires for objects held us fast in the mire of earth, desire for the ideal lifts us on strong wings to heaven. All right, the purification of desire. So what do we do about this? Okay, so we have already seen how much may be done in the purification of the vehicle of desire and the contemplation and worship of the ideal, which has just been described as a most potent means for the purification of desire. Evil desires die away as good desires are encouraged and fostered, die away merely from want of nourishment. The effort to reject all desires is accompanied by the firm refusal of thought to allow them to pass on into actions. Will begins to restrain action even when desire clamors for gratification. And this refusal to permit the action instigated by wrong desire gradually deprives of all attractive power the objects which erstwhile aroused it. The objects of sense turn away from an abstemious dweller in the body. The desires fade away, starved by lack of satisfaction. Abstention from gratification is a potent means of purification. There is another means of purification in which the repulsive force of desire is utilized, as in the contemplation of the ideal, the attractive force was evoked. It is useful in extreme cases in which the lowest desires are tumultuous and insurgent, such desires as lead to the vices of gluttony, drunkenness, and profligacy. Sometimes a man finds it impossible to get rid of evil desires, and despite all his efforts, his mind yields to their strong impulse, and evil imaginations riot in his brain. He may conquer by apparent yielding, carrying on evil imaginations to their inevitable results. He pictures himself yielding to the temptations that assail him and sinking more and more into the grip of the evil that masters him. He follows himself as he falls deeper and deeper, becoming the hopeless slave of his passions. He traces with vivid imagination the stages of his descent, sees his body becoming coarser and coarser, then bloated and diseased. He contemplates the shattered nerves, the loathsome sores, the hideous decay and ruin of the once strong and healthy frame. He fixes his eyes on the dishonored death, the sad legacy of shameful memory left to relatives and friends. He faces in thought the other side of death and sees the soil and distortion of his vices pictured in the suffering astral body and the agony of the craving of desires that may no longer be fulfilled. Resolutely, he forces his shrinking thoughts to dwell on this miserable panorama of the triumph of wrong desires, until there rises within him a strong repulsion against them, an intolerable fear and loathing of the result of present yielding. This is incredibly deep psychologically as we get into this, because I'm certain this is our experience and has happened for many of us, that we have at least glimpsed what is being said here. Such a method of purification is like the surgeon's knife cutting out a cancer which menaces the life, and like all surgical operations is to be avoided unless no other means of cure remain. Now, this is something that we look at as fear, and then it's almost, I want to say, that we overcome this and push it off and continue in whatever that behavior is, though, without actually yielding to this when it's not being done more or less purposefully. It is better to conquer wrong desire by the attractive force of an ideal than by the repulsive force of a spectacle of ruin. But where attraction fails to conquer, repulsion may perhaps prevail. So it's another option. There is also a danger in this latter method, since the coarser matter in the vehicle of desire is increased by this dwelling in thought on evil, and the struggle is thereby rendered longer than when it is possible to throw life into good desires and high aspirations. Therefore, it is the worst method of the two, only to be accepted when the other is unattainable. Makes sense. By higher attraction, by repulsion, or by the slow teaching of suffering, desire must be purified. The must is not so much a necessity imposed by an outside deity as the imperial command of the deity within, who will not be denied. With this true will of the divinity, who is our self, all divine forces in nature work, and that divine self who wills the highest must inevitably in the end subdue all things to himself. With this triumph comes the ceasing of desire. For then external objects no longer either attract or repel the outgoing energies of Atma, and these energies are entirely directed by self-determined wisdom. That is, will has taken the place of desire. Good and evil are seen as the divine forces that work for evolution, the one as necessary as the other, the one the complement of the other. The good is the force that is to be worked with, the evil is the force that is to be worked against. By the right using of both, the powers of the self are evolved into manifestation. When the self has developed the aspect of wisdom, he looks on the righteous and the wicked, the saint and the sinner with equal eyes, and is therefore equally ready to help both to reach out strong hands to either. Desire, which regarded them with attraction and repulsion as pleasure-giving and pain-giving, has ceased, and will, which is energy directed by wisdom, brings fitting aid to both. Thus man rises above the tyranny of the pairs of opposites and dwells in the eternal peace. Well, I always want to say it just all seemed like very much like common sense, and it should hit us all properly. And I don't know if you're in the middle of these battles, then hopefully now we are more aware of what is happening there. So, okay, well, I'm going to stop it here, and we will get on to emotion tomorrow. All right, have a good one.